Okay, so oh, good, it's working. It's working. Okay, so Battlefield 2042 has been out since Friday. It's got its public release, global release. It's out, and it's fair to say that the game at the minute is in a somewhat stable condition. I think it's the best way to put it. Mainly because if you look at the reviews people have given the game, people absolutely pan the game. Steam, it's actually one of the worst performing Steam games at the minute in terms of reviews. However, critical reviews have been decent at best. We can only say that they've been decent, they haven't been great. But for the most part, the main concern a lot of people have for the game, it just doesn't run as well as it should. You'll often hear a lot of people say, there's hit detection issues, the spawns are broken, the weapon balancing isn't great. Overall, it's just a game that wasn't ready to launch, and EA know this, but EA pushed the game out anyway. It's not the first time EA have done this. EA has done this lots and lots of times, but the game did get its global release, and EA within the global release decided, you know what, it's time to give a patch out. It's gonna, do a patch that'll fix the game. With a bit of luck, it'll take away a lot of the issues, and for the most part, looking in on it, I think it has taken away a chunk of the issues. It's not taken away every issue, but I've noticed upon playing it again that the hit detection feels a bit better. It doesn't feel great by any stretch of the imagination. There's still times, you'll probably see throughout this video in the background, that I'm actually throwing bullets into people, and for the most part, it just is not killing them. And realistically, it shouldn't in that situation. It shouldn't be a situation where I'm, having to fight with a weapon to get it to work. That's something that should really be taken out upon launch. But for the most part, it's actually a much more stable condition when it comes to weapons and their firing in this game at the minute. Now, one thing I have noticed about the game, and now it's just me, okay? Now, I'm going to go in on this. I'm not the biggest Battlefield fan in a sense. Like, I don't hate the game, but I haven't played enough of the games, like, for the last 20 years to say, oh, I'm a Battlefield veteran, or I'm this or that. I've played pretty much Battlefield 3 onwards. I know a lot of people will be saying, well, we played Bad Company, we played, 1942, etc. And that's all fair enough. They have a lot more of experience with this game franchise than I do. But in saying that, one thing that I noticed when I went back on Battlefield 4, etc., is that whenever it came to blowing up like tanks and armored vehicles and so forth, I always found it a bit challenging. In this game, I'm actually finding it maybe a bit too easy. Like when it comes to the rocket launchers, I think maybe those heavy assault weapons may actually be a bit too overpowered, because, like I say, in past Battlefield games, it always felt like a bit of a challenge to blow like tanks up and so forth. Whereas in this game, it does feel like it's a straightforward. You just have to hit it like 3 times, and it's pretty much blown up. There's really nothing the driver of it can do about it, which is, I don't know if it's disappointing or if it's good. I don't know what the intention was. Was that made specifically for like newer players to come into the game and not be trounced on? Because other game franchises have done that, where they've made the game realistically easier and much more accessible to newer players. Battlefield for me has always felt like a closed shop when it comes to this sort of new player introduction. And what I mean by that is that with Call of Duty, you feel that anyone can pick up that game and realistically do well, and a lot of it is due to skill-based matchmaking. If you're new to Call of Duty, you can pick that up, and you'll be thrown into a game that, with a bunch of other new players who haven't had any other experience on any other game. Battlefield to me has always felt like a game that, you either have to be good at it, or you're going to suffer. And don't get me wrong, it's not like a closed shop in a sense that you'll just never be good at it, you'll never be able to play it, because realistically, these games are made with the intention of gaining a bigger audience. So, from a marketing point, EA have looked in on this and went, you know what, we want more and more players to play this, so we need you guys to make it easier. And that goes back to what I was saying about the weapons. Have the likes of the shotguns, have the likes of the rocket launchers been made, much more overpowered to coincide with lesser players being able to actually use them and blow up tanks? Because like I said, for me personally, all the years I played Battlefield, I always found it a bit of a challenge to try and blow up vehicles and so forth with the tank, with the rocket launchers. Not that it was ever impossible or anything like that. So like I was saying, for me on a personal note, I do think that it feels like EA have ended up making the game a lot more user friendly, and a lot of people may complain about that because on a personal point of view, it does make Battlefield feel almost like it's going in a Call of Duty direction, which is probably not the direction that they actually want to go in. But whenever you look at the competition and realise the Call of Duty is manifesting the sales, and the sales are pretty much going to Call of Duty, I don't actually blame EA for taking this direction and this approach, because your main competitor is Call of Duty at this point if you're EA and Battlefield. So what you want to do is you want to end up soaking in and bringing in as much of that audience as possible. The problem being is the fact that the game itself isn't in the best of state to coincide with these new players, who will more than likely put the game down because in their own eyes and opinions it's a broken game, which is actually really, really bad from a consumer situation, because the consumer isn't going to keep playing this thing because realistically it's a broken state of a game. But I'm here to talk about, have they actually fixed the game itself with the patch? And They have, but also haven't. I mean, within the game itself, there's still a lot of big issues. For instance, the spawns are still a mess. You know, and like I said, there's certain weapons that feel way more overpowered than other weapons. Now, another way of looking at the overpowered weapons is that a game that did it really well, in a sense, was Modern Warfare 2. Now, Modern Warfare 2, for those of you who never played this, and I know I'm going in a Call of Duty direction with this video, I apologise, but I need to make my point here. Modern Warfare 2 was built with the structure of making the game that everything was overpowered. If everything was overpowered, then no one could complain about anything. And for the most part, a lot of people like that, mainly because everyone was at the same playing field. Whereas when it comes to this game in its own right, there's a lot of weapons within this game that are more powerful than, say, a beginner weapon that you'll have. For instance, a lot of the attachments that I'm running using, they do, you know, make my gun feel and perform better. The problem is that if someone's using the, I've noticed maybe the PP20 or whatever it is in this game, I apologise for that, I'll get the name up in the video you're seeing here, the name's more likely to come up. But if someone's using that weapon, my weapon doesn't have a chance because that weapon's a lot faster, and the game has been structured to build like that. It's an issue that is within the game itself and that the developers haven't really looked at. Weapons are overpowered. That's the best way I can put it. There is a lot of OP weapons that need balancing at this point. But playing this game in the state it's in now, as the way it was in the early access period, the weapons aren't as overpowered. They're still overpowered as hell, don't get me wrong, they're still very overpowered, but they're not as overpowered as what they have been leading up to the actual global release of the game. Another thing that I think personally needs a lot of work still is the UI. The user interface in this game, if you ask me personally, is still a mess. It's still very confusing, it's not straightforward at all, and it brings you back to the old sort of saying, and if it's don't broke, don't fix it. And I really feel like Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1, etc., and even Battlefield 5 had a concept when it came to the user interface, it ain't broke so don't fix it approach. So I don't understand why they've tried to be too fancy and why they've tried to overstep the mark with Battlefield 2042's UI. Realistically, I think this is probably a big glaring issue, is that this itself needs work, and honestly I want to see DICE do a bit of work to this. Whether or not EA will allow them to is another question, but realistically EA look at Battlefield as their Call of Duty. It's the game that they perceive as their top seller, so more than likely EA will allow DICE to actually fix the user interface itself with a bit of luck. Going back to another thing that I've noticed about the game, and this is just my own personal opinion, again some people could love this, realistically the game feels like a running simulator at this point. The game itself honestly feels like you spend more time running to an objective, and a lot of people will say, well, that's the intention because the bigger maps, you know, can hold bigger players and bigger player base. I understand that, but it may be me, but personally I think the maps feel that they're just too big. Like, I get that they're made, you know, to host 130 players. The problem is that the maps feel way too big. I'm sorry, but it is just a point, and you can actually tell how big the map is just when you load into it and see the amount of flags that you actually need to capture. The game itself is a running simulator, it feels like, for the most part. The problem is, as people make the argument, yeah, but it's fun when you engage in combat. The problem is, but you don't engage in combat enough to really give a good example of, well, okay, the maps are an okay size for the amount of combat that you have in the game, and that's a real issue that DICE need to look at. Do they end up making the maps smaller? Any potential DLC maps that they have lined up, do they make them smaller? Because it's a really tricky situation, and it's really difficult for DICE to get this right, because if the maps are too small, then everyone's going to complain that they're way too small for the player base. But in the situation we're in now, where the maps are just way too big, the player base is already complaining, so it's one of those, you have to be blunt about it. You either have to cut the player base in half in terms of what matches can hold, or you just go balls to the wall and say, you know what, this is what we're doing, we're going in this direction, I'm sorry if you guys don't like it, but we have to think of what we think is the best for the game. And that in its own right is, on one hand, very brave, and I'll hold my hands up and say, well, you know what, good on you guys, you're doing what you want to stick to, you're doing your own thing. I really do think it's a good idea you doing this. The problem is that a lot of user feedback is negative towards this. It really is. The maps, for me personally, like I say, are too big for the game, so they are. They just feel like a running simulator for the most part. The game itself, in its own right, when I'm engaged in combat, is really fun and I enjoy it. The problem is that the maps just don't allow for enough combat to be had unless you're in a situation where you've spawn trapped someone. And spawn trapping is a big issue in this game that I've noticed. I've run into quite a bit of spawn trapping. And realistically, that's not what you want in a game. You want a game and a map to flow brilliantly. This game doesn't flow that well at all. So it doesn't, because there's too much spawn trapping going on in one location. And the maps just feel like they're too big to have enough combat going on. Now, if you're a sniper, you probably don't even realize this issue, because the sniper, let's be honest, will pick their spot and they will basically kill you in it. That's not a real issue, but for the likes of me who likes to run with a submachine gun or assault rifle, for me that's a real issue, because I don't like to sit and camp in one position. I like to actually engage in combat. The problem is, but I'm not getting enough combat to really satisfy myself. The final thing that I want to touch on here is something that a lot of people have actually said on one hand is a really good thing, but on the other hand have said it's a bit of a questionable remark, and that is the actual editing gun within the game itself. When you load into the game, you can actually end up just loading your gun and doing whatever you want with it as soon as you're in the match. I don't actually know if I like that, and it's not that I don't like it because it's a bot feature or anything like that. I just don't see how it benefits the actual gameplay itself, because unless you're using something like a sniper, again going back to the snipers, unless you're using something like a sniper where you end up just having to take your scope off or you have to put the scope on, I don't see how it makes much of a change to your weapon and how it changes the complexion of the gameplay of the map. I just realistically don't, I can't really talk about it too much because there isn't really enough complaints on it. I'm going to have to play a game a bit more, but for the most part the concept of this video is, have DICE fixed Battlefield 2042? I'm going to say yes, but no at the same time, and it's really confusing why I would say that. The game for me feels like it has been touched, it has got a bit of work since the early access period, but it still needs a lot of work. It's still heavily unfinished, and to a fair point, DICE have fixed a bit, but not enough to really say that the game's in a good state. If I was to compare this to, say, Battlefield 4, which is the other Battlefield that I played quite a bit of, I would say this game feels like a watered down and poor man's attempt of making a Battlefield game. It really feels like they've tried to make a bigger scale Modern Warfare 2019, which should have never been the goal. The goal of this game should have always been to make a Battlefield game at heart and what Battlefield is. This is not a Battlefield game for me at the minute, you guys. So, have DICE fixed the game? Yes, but no. I've been encouraging you. If you guys agree with any of the comments I made in this, please feel free to comment. If you guys disagree with it, by all accounts, leave a dislike. Tell me why you disagree and what you think they need to do to make it work, make it fixed. But other than that, I've been encouraging you, and you have a nice day. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. If you like this video and you want to see more, hit subscribe, turn on notifications. But other than that, have a nice day. Peace.